What the hell is this stinking thing? Leave my bank, now!
I just want to put money in my account.
Your account? You reek. My clients shouldn't breathe the same air as you. Out! Before I call the cops.
An old black woman, soaking wet in a marble lobby under chandeliers, a crumpled paper bag against her chest. Every customer watched. Nobody said a word. Just the soft drip of rain from her jacket onto polished stone. Beatrice Owens stumbled but didn't fall. Her worn shoes squeaked on the marble. She looked back at him, eyes steady, quiet, unbroken. Then she walked out alone into the rain. What Gerald didn't know was that the woman he just threw out like trash could end his entire career, and she was about to make it. Have you ever watched a man's face collapse the second he realizes the woman he just threw out like trash could end his entire career with one phone call? You are about to. So drop a comment, hit that like, and let me take you back to the beginning. Beatrice Owens woke up at 5:45 in the same two-bedroom house she'd lived in her entire life, south side of Chicago. The wooden floors creaked under her feet. The kitchen smelled like coffee and lavender, same as it had for 40 years. She moved slowly, opened the closet, reached past rows of clothes she never wore anymore, and pulled out a faded floral blouse, old slacks, a thin rain jacket from the thrift store, orthopedic shoes with the soles worn smooth, no jewelry, no watch, just a thin gold wedding band she never took off. She dressed the same way every first Tuesday of the month, had been doing it for years, because that was the deal she and her husband made. When they were young, before the money, before the bank, before any of it, they used to walk together from this neighborhood to the nearest branch. He'd wear his old work jacket. She'd wear her headscarf. They'd carry whatever cash they had in a brown paper bag, walk up to the counter and deposit it. Their first deposit was $200. They didn't even own a car. They kept doing it every month, even after Heritage First National became one of the largest black-owned banks in the Midwest, even after their net worth hit 10 figures. Same clothes, same walk, same paper bag. It was their ritual, a way of remembering where they came from. Her husband passed away 5 years ago, heart attack on a Sunday morning, quick, no warning. The house still smelled like him for weeks after. She kept his jacket in the closet, never moved it. Beatrice kept the ritual, same clothes, same route, same paper bag with $500 cash inside. She didn't do it because she had to. She did it because on those mornings, wearing his favorite blouse, walking the path they used to walk together, she could almost feel him beside her. His footsteps matching hers, his hand near her elbow at the crosswalk, gone but still there. Today it was raining. She walked 30 minutes through it. By the time she reached the downtown flagship branch of Heritage First National, her jacket was soaked through. The old fabric smelled of damp and mildew. Water dripped from her headscarf down the back of her neck. The building rose in front of her, glass and limestone revolving doors, a lobby with marble floors and chandeliers. She had built this bank. Her name was on the founding documents, but there was no photo of her anywhere, no Wikipedia page, no press interviews. She had kept herself invisible on purpose. She pushed through the revolving door. The cold air conditioning hit her wet skin. The lobby smelled like leather and cologne. Polished shoes clicked on stone. Soft jazz played from ceiling speakers. And today, for the first time in 14 months, Gerald Crawford was not in his office. Gerald had been branch manager since last year. Most mornings he sat behind his glass door making calls, reviewing numbers. He never came out to the floor. That's why he'd never seen Beatrice. She came in, Dorothy processed her deposit in 2 minutes, and she left before he even looked up. But this morning was different. Gerald was standing in the middle of the lobby in his tailored charcoal suit, personally greeting Warren Caldwell, a wealthy client he'd been courting for a month. The biggest deal of the quarter. Gerald had his widest smile on. His handshake was firm. His cologne was fresh. He'd also just received an email that morning. Regional evaluation coming in 2 weeks. Every detail of the branch would be scored. Appearance, client satisfaction, brand image. Gerald was obsessed with perfection. Beside him stood Pamela Jennings, his deputy manager, clipboard in hand, nodding at everything Gerald said. She owed him her promotion. 3 times a minority customer had filed a complaint about Gerald. 3 times Pamela had written the response, no basis found. Without Pamela, Gerald would have been disciplined a year ago. Behind the teller counter sat Dorothy Sims. A small photo of her daughter Lily was taped to the corner of her screen. Lily was 5. Sickle cell disease. Monthly hospital visits. Medication that cost more than Dorothy's rent. The bank's health insurance was the only thing keeping Lily in treatment. If Dorothy lost this job, she lost the insurance. If she lost the insurance, Lily lost her treatment. Dorothy had watched Gerald humiliate black and brown customers for 14 months. Every time she wanted to speak up, she looked at Lily's photo, and every time she swallowed it. This was the room Beatrice Owens walked into, soaking wet, smelling of rain and mildew, clutching a crumpled paper bag on the worst possible morning. Beatrice pushed through the revolving door. The air conditioning hit her like a wall, sharp, cold chemical. Her wet jacket clung to her arms. Her shoes left damp prints on the marble with every step. The lobby stretched out ahead of her. High ceilings, chandeliers, the smell of leather and cologne, a world made of glass and stone and money. She kept her head down. She wasn't here to be noticed. She was here to do what she did every first Tuesday. Walk in, deposit the money, walk out. 2 minutes, maybe 3. She joined the line, 4 people ahead of her, a man in a navy suit, a woman with a designer bag, a young couple filling out paperwork. Beatrice stood behind them, paper bag pressed to her chest, water still dripping from her sleeves onto the polished floor. The man in front of her glanced back. His eyes moved from her wet headscarf to her worn shoes. He shifted forward half a step. The woman beside him did the same. A small gap opened around Beatrice, not dramatic, not obvious, but there. The kind of gap people create without admitting it, the kind that says you don't belong here without using a single word. Beatrice didn't react. She'd been standing in gaps like that her whole life. The line moved. One customer finished, then another. Beatrice stepped forward each time, patient, quiet, the paper bag never leaving her hands. She could feel the damp fabric of her blouse sticking cold against her back. A drop of water ran from her headscarf along her temple. She didn't wipe it. She just waited her turn, the way she always did. She reached the counter, Dorothy's counter.
Dorothy looked up and recognized her immediately. 14 months of the same visit, same day, same time, same paper bag. Dorothy didn't know who Beatrice really was, just the quiet old woman who deposited $500 cash, said thank you, and left. Never complained, never caused trouble. The easiest customer Dorothy had. Dorothy smiled, small, quick, warm. She reached for the deposit slip. 2 minutes, same as always. But today, Gerald Crawford was not behind his glass door. Gerald was 6 feet away, mid-conversation with Warren Caldwell, when his eyes drifted across the lobby. They swept past the teller line and stopped. A woman in a soaking wet rain jacket, a crumpled headscarf, worn-out shoes leaving watermarks on his marble. A brown paper bag sitting on his polished granite counter like garbage someone forgot to throw out. Gerald's jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. He looked at Warren in the VIP area, legs crossed, reading a portfolio, pen tapping against the armrest of a leather chair, then back at Beatrice. The math in Gerald's head was simple. Warren Caldwell was worth millions. The woman at the counter looked worth nothing, and she was standing 6 feet from the biggest deal of his quarter, in his lobby, on his marble, dripping water under his chandeliers. On the same morning he'd received an email about a regional evaluation that would score every detail of this branch, appearance, client satisfaction, brand image. Everything Gerald lived for. He excused himself from Warren with a smooth smile. "1 moment, Mr. Caldwell, let me handle something." He walked toward the teller counter, fast, shoulders squared, his shoes clicked hard against marble, each step louder than it needed to be. The sound bounced off the high ceiling like a countdown. Dorothy saw him coming. Her hand froze on the deposit slip. She knew that walk. She'd seen it before, every time Gerald spotted a customer who didn't fit his picture. The elderly Latino man he made wait 40 minutes. The young black woman he demanded 3 forms of ID from. The Indian couple he sent to the back of the line twice for incomplete paperwork that was perfectly complete. Dorothy had watched every time, and said nothing every time. Gerald reached the counter. He stepped between Dorothy and the granite, blocking her completely. He didn't look at her, didn't ask what was happening, didn't glance at the deposit slip. He looked straight at Beatrice, slowly, deliberately. From her wet headscarf down to her soaked shoes, then back up, taking his time, making sure every person in the lobby could see exactly who he was looking at and exactly how he felt about what he saw. The lobby went quiet. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Someone at the writing desk stopped mid-sentence and looked up. "This is a bank," his voice carried across the marble, not shouting worse, controlled, projected, every syllable designed for the whole room. "Not a soup kitchen, not a shelter, a bank. Do you understand that?" Beatrice met his eyes. "I have an account here. I'd like to put money in, please." Gerald tilted his head. His eyebrows rose in a slow, exaggerated arc, the look you give a child who just said something stupid. He stared at the paper bag like it was something dead. "You have an account." Flat. Each word tasted like a lie he was spitting back. Then he leaned toward Dorothy, speaking loud enough for Beatrice and everyone within 20 feet
to hear every word. Check if this woman even has a real account, or if she found somebody's deposit slip in a trash can and walked in here thinking she could fool us. A customer 2 spots back let out a short laugh, not loud, but enough.
The sound hung in the air like permission. Permission for everyone else to look away, to not get involved, to pretend this was normal. Another man near the door smirked. A woman with a stroller stared at her phone. Nobody said stop. Nobody said that's enough. Nobody said anything at all. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick and heavy, full of people choosing not to see what was right in front of them. Beatrice stood still, both hands on the paper bag. Her gold wedding band caught the chandelier light, her fingers pressed into the brown paper, not shaking, but holding on, like the bag was the last solid thing left in the room, like letting go of it would mean letting go of something much bigger. She said nothing. She had told him she had an account. She had said please. There was nothing else to say to a man who had already decided she was nothing. Gerald smirked, smoothed his tie with one hand, then he turned his back on her, casually, effortlessly, like she had already stopped existing, and walked toward his office, shoes clicking on marble, cuffs adjusted, shoulders rolling, the body language of a man who believed he had just finished a small, unpleasant chore. Something beneath him, something already forgotten. Dorothy stood frozen behind the counter, deposit slip in one hand, pen in the other creaking under her grip. Her knuckles had gone pale. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell Gerald that this woman came every single month, that her account was real, that in 14 months Beatrice Owens had never raised her voice, never caused a problem, never been anything but kind. But Pamela was standing 3 feet to her left, arms crossed, eyes narrow, watching. Pamela, who wrote the internal reports. Pamela, who decided which complaints had no basis. Pamela, who could put one note in Dorothy's HR file and start the clock on a termination that would take everything, the paycheck, the insurance, and with it every dollar that kept Lily alive. Dorothy looked at the corner of her screen, the small photo taped there. Lily in a hospital gown, smiling wide, a stuffed rabbit in one hand and an IV line trailing from the other. 5 years old. Sickle cell disease. 12 hospital visits last year. Medication that cost more than rent. Insurance that covered 80% only as long as Dorothy kept this job. Lose the job, lose the insurance. Lose the insurance, lose the treatment. That was the equation. That had always been the equation. Every month, every incident, every time she swallowed her words, Lily was the reason. Dorothy looked at the photo. Then she looked at Beatrice, still at the counter, still holding the bag, rain still dripping from her jacket onto cold marble, standing exactly where Gerald had left her. Not moving, not leaving, just standing there like a woman who had nowhere else to go. 2 women. Same skin, same silence, one behind the counter, one in front of it, both trapped by a man who had already walked away and closed his office door. Dorothy swallowed everything she wanted to say. The words went down like broken glass. Beatrice stood alone. The deposit slip sat untouched. The paper bag sat on granite. The lobby hummed with air conditioning and soft jazz, and the quiet shuffle of people going on with their lives, as if nothing had happened. Nobody looked at her. Nobody said a word. Gerald came back out of his office 90 seconds later, not to apologize, not to serve her. He walked straight to Beatrice, still standing at the counter, and pointed toward the entrance. "Sit over there." He gestured to a row of plastic chairs pushed against the wall near the front door. The dead corner of the lobby, right next to the trash can. Every time the revolving door spun, a gust of outside air swept through, hot in summer, cold in winter, wet today. The lighting was dimmer there. The marble gave way to scuffed tile. No customer ever sat in those chairs on purpose. They were furniture that existed only because someone had put them there once and nobody had bothered to remove them. "The system needs to verify your account," Gerald said. His voice had shifted, no longer performing for the lobby, just flat and dismissive, like he was giving directions to someone who wouldn't be here long. "Sit, wait, I'll let you know." There was no verification process. Gerald knew that. Dorothy knew that. Pamela knew that. Every teller in the building knew there was no system that required a customer to sit in a plastic chair by the trash can while their account was verified. It was a lie dressed in procedure, and nobody in that building was going to call it what it was. Beatrice looked at the chairs. She looked at Gerald. Then she picked up her paper bag, stepped away from the counter, and walked to the dead corner of the lobby. She sat down. The plastic chair creaked under her weight. The trash can was 18 inches to her right. Stale coffee, old paper, something sweet and rotting at the bottom. Every time the revolving door moved, wind pushed through and her wet jacket pressed cold against her skin. She could feel the dampness seeping through to her bones. She folded her hands over the paper bag in her lap, and she waited. 10 minutes passed.
A customer walked up to Dorothy's counter, was served, and left. Then another, then another. The line moved. People came and went. The lobby breathed in and out like nothing was wrong. Like there wasn't a 72-year-old woman sitting next to a trash can in a building worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Beatrice sat. Nobody came to her. Nobody looked her way. 20 minutes. Gerald's office door stayed closed. Through the glass wall she could see him on the phone, leaning back in his leather chair, laughing at something. He never looked toward the entrance. Not once. She had stopped existing the moment he turned his back. 30 minutes. Beatrice had watched 9 customers get served since she sat down. 9 people who arrived after her waited in line, finished their business, and walked out into their day. She was still in the same plastic chair, paper bag in her lap, wet jacket drying stiff against her shoulders. The draft kept coming every time someone pushed through the revolving door. Her knees ached from the cold. Her back was tight from the hard plastic, but she didn't move. Dorothy couldn't take it anymore. She stood up from her station and took a step toward Beatrice. She was going to bring her back to the counter and process them into something it doesn't need to be, Dorothy. Dorothy looked at Pamela's hand on her arm, then at Pamela's face, calm, blank, rehearsed, the expression of someone who had practiced not caring until it became permanent. Dorothy looked at the photo of Lily on her screen, the stuffed rabbit, the IV line, the smile that didn't know what any of this cost. She sat back down. Her pen creaked in her grip. Beatrice stood up. She walked to the counter for the second time. Her shoes were still damp. Her joints were stiff from 30 minutes in the draft. She spoke softly, the way you speak when you've already been ignored once and you're trying one more time. "I've been waiting a long time. When can I make my deposit?" Gerald's office door swung open. He stepped out and stopped halfway across the lobby. He didn't walk to the counter. He didn't lower his voice. He just raised it loud, sharp, the way you'd talk to someone you wanted everyone to see you putting in their place. "I told you to sit and wait. Do I need to call the police? Because I will. Sit down." Beatrice didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She turned around, walked back to the plastic chair, and sat down. The trash can, the draft, the wet jacket, the paper bag in her lap. Again, the same chair, the same corner, the same nothing. In the VIP area, Warren Caldwell had been watching the entire time. He'd seen Gerald mock Beatrice at the counter. He'd watched her get sent to the chairs by the trash can. He'd counted the minutes, 5, 15, 25, 30. He'd seen Gerald threaten to call the police on a 72-year-old woman whose only request was to deposit money into her own account. Warren didn't say anything. He didn't confront Gerald. He didn't make a speech. He simply made a decision. He uncrossed his legs, closed the portfolio, placed his pen inside, stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the glass door without a word. Gerald saw him moving. His face changed, the color drained fast. He rushed across the lobby, voice suddenly warm, suddenly desperate. "Mr. Caldwell, Warren, is everything all right? We were just about to go over the—" Warren stopped. He looked at Gerald the way you look at something you've decided you want nothing to do with. "I don't do business with people who treat their customers like that." He nodded once toward Beatrice in the plastic chair. "Good luck with your evaluation." He walked out. The revolving door spun behind him. Gerald watched through the glass as Warren crossed the street, got into a black sedan, and pulled away without looking back. Gone. The biggest deal of the quarter. Gone. Gerald stood in the middle of the lobby, hands at his sides, jaw working, the vein on his left temple pulsing under the fluorescent light. The lobby was quiet around him. Every teller pretended to be busy. Every customer pretended not to notice. The soft jazz kept playing from the ceiling speakers, light, pleasant, completely wrong for what was happening. He needed someone to blame, and the answer was obvious. Everything had been perfect this morning. The lobby was clean, Warren was ready to sign, the evaluation was under control. Then she walked in, soaking wet, smelling like mildew, carrying a paper bag like a damn beggar off the street. She ruined it, all of it, every single piece. He crossed the lobby in 8 steps, fast, hard. His shoes cracked against the marble like something breaking. He stopped directly in front of Beatrice's chair. For the first time all morning, he was standing over her, close enough to smell the damp mildew rising off her rain-soaked clothes, close enough to see every crack in the leather of her shoes and every line on her face. His face twisted. "You stink." Loud this time. Not controlled, not professional, raw. "You smell like a wet dog. You just cost me the biggest client I've had all year. You and your damn paper bag and your bullshit about having an account." Beatrice looked up at him from the plastic chair. She didn't shrink, didn't cry, didn't blink. Her eyes met his steady, calm, ancient, and she said 6 words. "I am the founder of this bank." Gerald stared at her.
For 1 second, something flickered across his face. Not belief, just confusion, like a circuit misfiring. Then he looked at her soaked jacket, the crumpled headscarf, the worn-out shoes, and he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a real one, loud, sharp, full of genuine amusement. He turned to Pamela near the counter and pointed at Beatrice with his thumb. "Did you hear that? She says she's the founder." He looked at Calvin Moore, the security guard standing by the door. "You catching this? The founder of the bank." He laughed again, harder, shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then the laughter stopped, like a switch flipped. His face went flat, cold, dead. "Get her out of my bank, now." Calvin walked over, big man, ex-military, broad shoulders. He reached down and took Beatrice's elbow, gentle but firm, the grip of someone following an order he didn't agree with but didn't know how to refuse. Beatrice looked up at Calvin. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She placed her small hand on his wrist, wrinkled fingers over broad knuckles, and gently lifted his grip off her arm. Then she stood up on her own, straightened her back, adjusted the paper bag against her chest, and walked toward the glass door under her own power. Nobody leading, nobody dragging. She walked out the way she had walked in, quiet, upright, alone. The revolving door spun, the cold air rushed in one last time, and she was gone. Dorothy stood behind the counter, tears running down both cheeks. She didn't wipe them. She didn't want anyone to see her hands move. The revolving door closed behind her. The noise of the lobby, the jazz, the murmurs, the hum of air conditioning cut off like someone had pressed mute. All that was left was the rain. Beatrice stood on the sidewalk in front of the building she had built. The glass facade rose above her, 5 stories of limestone and steel. Her name was in the founding charter, locked in a vault on the 3rd floor. And she was standing outside in the rain like a stranger. Through the glass she could see the lobby, the warm light, the chandeliers. Dorothy behind her counter, head down. Gerald's office door closed. Nobody came out after her. Nobody opened the door. Nobody even looked toward the entrance. She walked to a public bench 10 feet from the front door. The wood was wet. She sat down anyway. The drizzle landed on her headscarf, her shoulders, the paper bag in her lap. Steady, thin. The kind of rain that doesn't pour, just soaks into you slowly until there's nothing dry left. She opened the bag, looked at the $500 inside bills she had counted that morning at her kitchen table. The same table where she and her husband used to sit together. She folded them carefully, the way he used to, and slid them into her left jacket pocket. His pocket, the one closest to her heart. People walked past on the sidewalk, a man in a suit, a woman with an umbrella. None of them looked at her. None of them slowed down. She was invisible, just an old black woman sitting on a wet bench outside a bank, holding an empty paper bag, looking like she had nobody left in the world. She sat still for a long time. Then she reached into her other pocket and pulled out a phone. 2 calls. Lorraine Prescott, Terrence Owens. She spoke the way she always spoke, calm, measured, clear. Then she hung up and waited. 30 minutes later, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Lorraine Prescott stepped out first, gray blazer, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to make a room go quiet. Behind her came Terrence Owens, 3-piece suit, leather briefcase, jaw set like a man who already knew exactly what was going to happen. They found Beatrice on the bench, still sitting, still wet. Lorraine extended her hand. Terrence took his grandmother's other arm. They helped her stand, and they walked her back toward the glass door, the same door she had been pushed through 30 minutes ago. This time it spun her back in. The lobby went silent, not quiet silent, the kind of silence that happens when every person in a room understands at once that something is about to change and cannot be undone. Beatrice walked in, same wet clothes, same crumpled headscarf, same worn shoes leaving damp prints on the marble. But on her left was the chairwoman of the board. On her right was a lawyer in a suit that cost more than Gerald's monthly salary. Customers froze mid-transaction. Tellers stood up from their stations. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording. Then another, then 5. Gerald's office door flew open. He came out fast, smile ready, hand extended the way he always greeted power. He saw Lorraine first, his face lit up. Then he saw Beatrice, standing right next to her. The woman he had thrown out, the woman he had laughed at. Standing between 2 people who clearly outranked him in every way that mattered. He stopped, mid-step, mid-smile. His hand froze in the air, extended toward nobody. Lorraine didn't shake it. She looked at him the way a judge looks at a defendant who has already been found guilty. 1 sentence. "This is Beatrice Owens. She is the founder and sole owner of this bank." The lobby held its breath. Gerald's face went through 3 stages in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, horror. The blood drained from his cheeks like water from a sink. His jaw dropped.
His hand fell to his side like something had cut the string holding it up. I didn't... There was no way to... Terrence stepped forward, not as a grandson, as a lawyer. He opened his briefcase, removed a single document, and held it out to Gerald. This is your formal suspension, effective immediately. The bank will open a full internal investigation into your conduct. Everything you say from this point forward may be used in legal proceedings. I'd advise you to stop talking. Gerald took the paper. His hands were shaking so badly the document trembled between his fingers like a leaf in wind. Calvin Moore walked over. The same security guard Gerald had ordered to remove Beatrice 30 minutes ago. Same broad shoulders, same gentle grip. He stood beside Gerald and waited. Gerald looked at Calvin. Calvin looked back. Neither said a word. Calvin took Gerald's elbow the same way he had taken Beatrice's and walked him toward the door. Past the counter where he had humiliated her. Past the plastic chairs where he had made her sit by the trash can for 30 minutes. Past every customer recording on their phones. Past Dorothy, who stood behind her counter with tears still drying on her face, watching the man who had silenced her for 14 months walk out of the building he would never enter again. The revolving door spun one last time. Gerald stepped through. The cold air hit him. And then he was gone. The same door, the same walk, the same direction, but everything had reversed. But it wasn't over yet. Outside, Gerald stood on the same sidewalk where Beatrice had sat 30 minutes ago, suspension letter in hand, face gray, tie crooked. For the first time all day, he didn't look like the man who ran this building. He looked like a man who had just been run out of it. He pushed back through the revolving door, hands raised, voice cracking.
Lorraine, Miss Prescott, please. This was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who she was. Nobody told me. If someone had just... You didn't need to know who she was, Gerald. Lorraine's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You needed to treat her like a human being. You failed. I've given 14 months to this branch. My numbers are the best in the entire... Your numbers don't matter when you throw a 72-year-old woman into the rain for smelling bad. Flat. Final. The kind of sentence that has no answer because it isn't asking a question. Your key card has been deactivated. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your office. Calvin will supervise. Gerald looked around the lobby. Tellers who wouldn't meet his eyes, customers still holding up phones, the marble floor he had obsessed over for 14 months gleaming under chandeliers that suddenly felt like spotlights. None of it was his anymore. Calvin walked him to the office. Gerald picked up a framed family photo from his desk wife and 2 kids on a beach somewhere warm. A coffee mug with the bank's logo. A leather notebook he'd carried to every meeting for a year. He placed them in a cardboard box that someone had already set on the desk. Someone in this building had known this was happening before Gerald did. He carried the box through the lobby, past the counter where he had humiliated Beatrice, past the plastic chairs by the trash can where he had made her sit for 30 minutes. Every step echoed off the marble. Nobody spoke, nobody nodded, nobody said goodbye. He walked out through the revolving door for the last time. The glass reflected the lobby behind him, bright, warm, already moving on without him. Inside, Lorraine turned to Pamela Jennings. Pamela stood near the teller counter, clipboard still in hand, face the color of old paper. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic. She didn't want to finish adding up every report she had buried and realizing the bill had just arrived. 3 minority customers filed complaints about Gerald Crawford over 14 months. Each was reviewed internally and closed, no basis found. Who wrote those reports, Pamela? Pamela didn't answer. Her clipboard tilted. A sheet of paper slid off and floated to the marble floor. She didn't pick it up. Pamela Jennings is also suspended effective immediately. Same investigation. Lorraine nodded to Terrence. He noted it in a folder without looking up. Pamela walked to the back office to collect her things. Nobody escorted her. Nobody needed to. She was already gone in every way that mattered. The lobby was still. Phones had come down. The jazz kept playing from the ceiling, soft, steady, absurdly calm against everything that had just happened. Beatrice stood near the entrance. She hadn't said a word since walking back in. She hadn't needed to. She turned to leave. As she passed Dorothy's counter, she slowed. Dorothy stood behind the glass partition, both hands flat on granite, tears still wet on her cheeks. She looked at Beatrice, and in that look was everything she had wanted to say for 14 months. Every sorry she had swallowed, every time she had chosen Lily over her conscience, every morning she had walked into this building and chosen silence. Beatrice looked back. No smile, no frown, a single slow nod, barely a movement, but enough. Enough to say, I know. I understand. Dorothy's breath caught. She nodded back. Beatrice walked toward the exit. Calvin stood by the entrance.
He had just returned from walking Gerald to the curb. As Beatrice approached, he did something quiet. He removed his security cap and held it against his chest with both hands, eyes red, jaw tight.
He didn't speak, just stood there, head bowed, cap pressed over his heart like a soldier standing over something he had failed to protect. Beatrice stopped. She reached up and placed her hand on his shoulder, small, wrinkled, steady, held it there for 1 second. Then she let go, turned and walked out through the revolving door into the gray afternoon. The rain had finally stopped. The video hit the internet before Gerald's box was in his car. One of the customers in the lobby, the one near the writing desk, had been recording since the moment Lorraine walked in with Beatrice. The clip was 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. It captured everything. Lorraine's single sentence, Gerald's face collapsing, Terence handing over the suspension, Calvin walking Gerald to the door. It was uploaded to social media with a caption that read, "Bank manager throws out elderly black woman for smelling bad. Turns out she owns the entire bank." Within an hour, it had 500,000 views. By that evening, it had crossed 4 million. By the next morning, it was on every major news platform in the country. The comments came in waves: outrage, disbelief, people tagging the bank, people tagging their local news stations, people sharing their own stories of being profiled, turned away, made to feel small in places where their money was supposed to be just as green as anyone else's. Gerald hired a crisis PR consultant within 48 hours. On the consultant's advice, he released a written statement. It said he deeply regretted the misunderstanding and that he had always strived to serve every customer with professionalism. He never used the word wrong. He never used the word sorry without a qualifier attached. The internet noticed. The statement made things worse. Inside Heritage First National, the machinery of accountability had already started turning. Lorraine authorized an independent civil rights audit. The bank hired an outside firm with no prior relationship to Heritage First, a team that specialized in institutional discrimination investigations. They were given full access to branch records, security footage, complaint files, and employee communications going back 18 months. What they found was systematic. Gerald Crawford had engaged in a pattern of discriminatory behavior throughout his 14 months as branch manager. At least 22 minority customers had been subjected to treatment that was never applied to white customers making comparable transactions. Extra identification demands, unexplained waiting periods, condescending language, refusal of routine services without valid justification. The cases weren't isolated. They followed a pattern, the same pattern repeated month after month, complaint after complaint, each one buried by Pamela's reports before it could reach anyone with the authority to act. Among the 22 was a woman named Gloria. She was 64 years old, black, a retired school teacher who had walked into the branch a year ago to open a savings account for her 8-year-old granddaughter. She brought every document the bank's website listed: ID, proof of address, social security card, her own account statements. Gerald told her the paperwork was insufficient. He didn't explain what was missing. He didn't offer to help her complete it. He just said no and called the next customer. Gloria went home. She didn't file a complaint. She assumed it was her fault, that she had missed something, filled something out wrong, that the problem was her. For 12 months she carried that feeling, the quiet shame of being turned away from a counter and not understanding why. Then she saw the video. She saw Beatrice standing in the same lobby, being treated the same way by the same man. And she realized it was never about the paperwork. It was never about her. She contacted Terence the next day. She was the first of the 22 to come forward. She would not be the last. The audit also uncovered Gerald's history. His previous employer, a regional bank in Indiana, had received a discrimination complaint from a Hispanic customer 2 years before Gerald transferred to Heritage First. The complaint was settled quietly, sealed. Gerald was given a neutral reference and allowed to leave without a mark on his public record. The system had cleaned him up and passed him along like a problem someone else could deal with. Terrence moved fast. As Beatrice's legal representative, he compiled the testimony from the 22 victims and filed a formal complaint with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. The state opened its own investigation into the branch's compliance practices. The consequences came in order. Gerald Crawford was formally terminated for cause. The termination letter cited 3 grounds: violation of the bank's anti-discrimination policy, fabrication of a non-existent compliance procedure used to deny service, and conduct unbecoming a representative of the institution. His banking license was placed under review by the state. Within weeks it was revoked. His career in banking was over. Pamela Jennings was terminated for complicity. The 3 internal reports she had written, each concluding "no basis found," were reviewed by the audit team and found to be false. She had not interviewed the complainants. She had not reviewed the security footage. She had simply written what Gerald needed her to write. Her professional record was flagged. Calvin Moore was formally reprimanded for following Gerald's order to remove Beatrice without objection. But before the disciplinary process was finalized, Calvin did something no one asked him to do. He wrote a letter, handwritten 2 pages, addressed directly to Beatrice Owens. In it he said he knew what Gerald was doing was wrong the moment he took her elbow. He said he had wanted to refuse, but this job, this security position at Heritage First National, was the only steady work he had found after 20 years in the Army. It paid his mortgage. It covered his wife's prescriptions. He couldn't afford to lose it, so he followed the order, and he had not stopped thinking about it since. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I will never let that happen again. Not on my watch, not to anyone." Beatrice read the letter at her kitchen table. She folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer where she kept her husband's old wallet. Then she called Lorraine and asked the board to reduce Calvin's disciplinary action. Lorraine agreed. 3 weeks after Gerald's termination, Warren Caldwell returned to the downtown branch. He sat in the same VIP area, crossed his legs the same way, and signed the contract he had walked away from. Under new leadership, under new rules. Beatrice approved a series of institutional reforms, mandatory anti-bias training for every employee across all branches, a customer ombudsman position at each location, someone whose only job was to ensure no customer was turned away without cause, a scholarship fund for underrepresented communities pursuing careers in banking, and a new board-level oversight committee chaired by Lorraine with the authority to review any branch conduct complaint directly, bypassing the internal reports that had failed 22 people. The system that had allowed Gerald to operate for 14 months was being rebuilt. Not perfectly, not overnight, but deliberately and with the kind of quiet determination that Beatrice Owens had brought to everything she had ever built. 6 months later, a Tuesday morning, first week of the month, the downtown branch of Heritage First National opened at 9. The marble was polished, the chandeliers were lit, the jazz was playing from the ceiling speakers, same as always. A black customer walked in, a young man in work boots and a paint-stained jacket. He approached the counter to open a checking account. The new teller, hired after Pamela's termination, glanced at his clothes, then asked him to wait over there while she checked something in the system. Dorothy Sims stood up from her station. She didn't look at Lily's photo. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the young man, apologized on behalf of the bank, and brought him to her own counter. She opened his account in 4 minutes. Then she filed an incident report about the new teller's behavior before her lunch break. It was on the branch manager's desk by 2 o'clock that afternoon. That same month, an old black woman in worn clothes walked through the revolving door. She moved slowly. Her shoes were scuffed. Her jacket was faded. Calvin Moore was standing by the entrance. He walked over, held the inner door open, and guided her to the shortest teller line. He stood beside her, not behind her, not watching her, but beside her, until she was served, and walking back out with a receipt in her hand. Then he returned to his post. Nobody had asked him to do that. There was no memo, no training module. Calvin just did it.
because he had promised himself and Beatrice that he would never let what happened that day happen again. Gerald Crawford was no longer in banking.
He was managing a used car lot in a suburb 90 miles from Chicago. His LinkedIn profile had been deleted. He declined every interview request. His name still surfaced in comment sections whenever the video resurfaced, which it did regularly, whenever someone somewhere was treated the way Beatrice had been. And people needed a reference point for what accountability actually looks like. Beatrice still walked to the branch on the first Tuesday of every month. Same faded blouse, same headscarf, same paper bag with $500 inside. Same route through the old neighborhood where the bakery owner still handed her a muffin and the kids on bikes still waved. She walked in, deposited the money, said thank you, walked out. Everything was the same as before, except that now nobody in that building would ever treat her or anyone who walked through that door the way Gerald Crawford had. Not because they knew who she was, but because the system had been rebuilt to make sure it couldn't happen again. And because the people inside at Dorothy Calvin, every teller and guard and manager who came after, had each decided in their own way that silence was no longer something they could live with. This story is fiction, but the assumption behind it, that how you look determines how much respect you deserve, is painfully documented real. Every single day, someone walks into a building and gets treated like Beatrice. Most of them don't own the building. Most of them don't get a phone call that brings the board chair running. Most of them just walk out into the rain and keep going. The lesson here is not, be careful who you disrespect, they might be rich. The lesson is harder than that. Dignity is not a reward for wealth. Gerald Ralph Crawford would have been just as wrong if Beatrice Owens had been exactly what he assumed, a homeless woman with $500 in a crumpled paper bag. The cruelty was the same either way. The only difference is that Beatrice had the power to make him answer for it. Most people don't. And that is the part that should keep all of us up at night. So here's the question. If you had been standing in that lobby watching Gerald Crawford talk to Beatrice Owens like that, would you have said something? Or would you have looked down at your phone the way everyone else did? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. Share this story if it hit you somewhere, because the more people talk about this, the harder it becomes to look away. If you're new here, subscribe. Every week we tell stories like this one. Stories where the truth comes out and justice doesn't just happen in the movies. Take care of each other. I'll see you in the next one. Look, dignity ain't something you earn by being rich. Nah. You treat people right because they're people, that's it. Not because they might own the whole building. Like, that's the entire lesson right there, y'all. Yeah, sit with that one.
Look, dignity ain't something you earn by being rich. Nah, you treat people right because they're people. That's it. Not because they might own the whole building. Like, that's the entire lesson right there, y'all. Yeah, sit with that one.